Welcome back to the Young Entrepreneurs Podcast. I'm your host, Spencer McPartland, and I have the great pleasure of having Professor Fonzo on, who's going to talk to us about AI and kind of why it's important, but also how it's going to get integrated, so to speak, within either the classroom, but also outside of the classroom. And so can you, I guess, kind of talk to us about your background and kind of how you got started in the entrepreneur, either the fellowship or just as a whole, if you will?
All right. So let me start with my background. My background really, I'm from Tanzania, East Africa, and grew up without a computer. My first real, experiences with computers were in the United States. So I had a very low tech background, which enabled me to have the entrepreneurial mindset and background early on before coming to the United States. And so when I arrived at the College of Charleston as an undergrad, this was in 1992, in the early days of the internet, and I still recall fond memories of some faculty mentors, Dr. Chris Starr in computer science, several others in the library basement at the College of Charleston, using the Netscape Mosaic and watching an image of, I think it was Mark Anderson from Netscape download. And I think it took us about 20 minutes, pixel by pixel, just watching. We took a break somewhere in between. I don't think anyone has the patience to wait more than zero point 0.2 seconds for anything to load. So things have changed. So this was, when the World Wide Web and the internet browsers first came around. So prior to that, there was Gopher and other systems. And I think what we're seeing here right now with the advent of generative AI is very similar to the early heydays of the dot-com boom and then bust, if you wish. Beyond that, there is a lot of what I call AI hype
Yeah.
and the AI hype cycle, or the generative AI. So AI has been around for a while, more than 20 years, if depending on how far back you want to go to automated systems. I think what's changed is generative AI and the fact that everyday users now have access to the technology at their fingertips, on their phones and on their computers to experiment. And it could be everything from, cat videos to deep fakes to, uh, you know, answering questions on your quizzes, whatever the case may be out there. So I think we've seen a lot of transitions. And like the internet, computer science department back in the day was offering courses on internet communications and technology, basically how to use the internet and how to validate resources. And so I think we're seeing something at the College of Charleston similar. We have intentional AI quality enhancement plan to equip our students to harness the power of AI, but also to be cautious, cautious in multiple ways. Personally, thinking about how your data could be at risk, and they're also avoiding scams that are online right now. And so, how do we prepare our students to keep themselves safe online? And B, how do we prepare them for future careers and job descriptions that we don't even know right now? 5 years from now, we may see total new skill sets based on what we're seeing happen in the workplace right now, transitioning to an AI enabled workplace.
So do you think that there's going to be a little bit of um, guardrails for what you're allowed to do with it versus what you're not allowed to do with it? Kind of how it's similar to social media with limiting it to like people under the age of 16 shouldn't be able to allowed to use it versus if you're 16 and older, you can use it. Kinda, do you follow kind of what I'm saying a little bit?
Yes. So this is what's happening in Australia. So I think you bring up a good point. Right now it's still somewhat like the Wild West of AI, where legislature always takes a while to catch up, and the guardrails are usually put in place after something negative has happened. And so we're seeing Australia very recently implement a ban on social media if you're under 16 years old. And so any enterprising young individual will find ways around them. We've seen that with VPNs and all. But for the most part, from a corporate perspective, the guardrails are starting to be put in place now. The guardrails generally will apply to legitimate law abiding firms and companies, and so that are within your jurisdictions in many cases. And so there's still the dark web out there where there are no guardrails. in place. So in terms of laws, yes, we probably will see a lot more legislation and guardrails put in place. China is a good example where there are limits and it's statewide imposition of limits on what citizens may have. Now, I'm not advocating necessarily that every country does that, but some countries and some institutions, have the ability and the capability to shut down and limit what the citizens have access to.
Now, we're thinking a little futuristic, bear with me. I know that there's always been this kind of like fantasy or whatever you want to call it, that it's a fantasy, but it's more or less like the fact that the computer, like, it's hard to explain, but yet it makes sense. It's like the computer thinks for itself, but yet it can be smarter than a person, and then it can mass produce itself. There's always, I'm sure, been thought of that the computer, not that it would enslave the person, but that it would be like the dominant or the dominant figure or whatever it is. And how do you kind of look at that? Do you think that it's going to be true, or do you think it's kind of a little bit of fable and fiction, so to speak?
That's a great question. For me personally, okay, this is just me as an individual speaking, not on behalf of any organization. Generative AI and AI, uh, as it is right now, in terms of automated tasks, things that we do on a regular basis with well defined outcomes, AI can do that. However, its ability to accommodate what I call the random. So we're seeing this happen also with self-driving cars, in clearly delineated roads, etc., in conditions that are acceptable. But someone darting across the street, yes, it will define it. But if it's a child in a shopping cart, for example, your visual systems, a human being would recognize something much quicker than automated systems will. So will AI replace humans? I guess that's part of your question.
I think that's part of it, but I think part of it was also like, is it gonna be more of like a dominant force and kind of like making people powerless, so to speak?
Personally, I do not believe so. I mean, if we go back to the Jetsons, would be self-propelled vehicles all over the place. So yeah, AI systems, automation, and processes. Yes, we will see more of that come into place. But AI taking over all of the functions that human beings are capable of doing, not necessarily. So I think the challenge really is what do we do in terms of nationwide or workforce? When the horse and buggy was replaced by the automobile, then guess what? You started having mechanics, and the printing press came around, and you created all types of different occupations that came around in some way to address the change. So that does happen. However, it's there's the vision of quantum computing, and so what computers can do right now that we take and we classify as intelligence is just essentially doing things that humans can do, but a lot quicker. So IBM's Big Blue was able to, outplay the grandmasters because of its speed and the ability to churn through millions of combinations. And so for structured problems, in many ways, you can definitely have a computer outthink a human being because of its speed. But in non-traditional scenarios where critical thinking, the unexpected conditions, until they're programmed into the computer, all of the unexpected variances, I think the human beings will still have an upper edge in what I call the outlier situations.
Where we are now, but how it looks in the future and how people are able to adapt with change.
So I think adaptability, our ability to accept. So the scenario over here is, when we have um, airlines now that have autopilot. Technically, an airline can take off and land without human intervention. So why do we have pilots on the planes if the technology is capable of taking off and landing, even in bad weather for that matter? So one would argue that the pilot's on the plane for the rest of the passengers in case of an emergency, in case of, the unexpected scenarios that weren't programmed in there. But I think it's a question of adaptability. Is this something that human beings want? Just because the machines are capable of doing that, I think you also have to address the employment, the purpose of human beings. What do we then do with this newfound time? Technology, however, with the advent of the washing machine, the microwave, and all other kinds of appliances that was supposed to save us time, in many ways they have, but we've still found ways to fill up the time and still feel just as stressed, if not more stressed than 5 or 6 generations ago. So I think the bigger picture over here is human beings having the ability to adapt, but also to have some control over the technology in their life in some way, shape or form. It's a challenging scenario because we tend to adapt to technology. We become addicted to technology. So on a college campus, for example, if I ask my students, if you leave your room without your phone, you're headed to class, do you go back, get your phone, or do you risk being 2 minutes late to the class? So Spencer, what do you think the most common answer for college students is?
Go
Do you
back
leave?
go back to my dorm room and I grab my phone.
Absolutely. So there's been only 2 students over the last 6 years who said they would leave their phone back, but, right after class, they would head right back to their dorm to pick up the phone. So I think it's not only the question of, technology has advanced, but our dependence on technology. We see this happen significantly when we have a blackout or internet outages in some ways. What do people do? How do we communicate? How do we interact? In courses also, we rely on all of our material in a learning management system, our email communication system. What happens when the power goes off? And so it's those outlier scenarios that we talk about in the advent of AI. We will potentially become even more dependent on technology. So, the College of Charleston, I teach entrepreneurship. I also teach cybersecurity and data science. And so I have multiple personalities when it comes to AI. In entrepreneurship, I love it because you have the opportunity to brainstorm with the technology, to very quickly create marketing materials, to fine tune your business plan, do scenario analysis, and then do some testing also, A/B testing, whatever the case may be out there, and then also connect with a wider audience. In artificial intelligence, data science, there's a lot of values for companies to find insights in data. And so that's something that automated systems and generative AI can help tremendously, is to really look at large data sets and look for insights. And you see this with the recommendation engines from early days, from Netflix to TikTok and TikTok addiction. So the pluses and minuses on that side. The part of me that teaches cybersecurity, quite frankly, is terrified um, about AI and its potential to fool human beings to a certain extent. We're seeing this with images, 2 images, and you ask human beings what's real in AI, and I think it's getting a little bit more difficult to do that. We're seeing that in short form video content. Before we could count on 3 fingers or 2 fingers to telltale, but it's gotten a little bit more sophisticated and will continue to do that. But what's really alarming is the ability of tool sets now to mimic voices and images from dear ones, or even customized email messages, and the automation of things that potentially could be cybersecurity risks. And so that part of me is really terrified. Now we've weaponized a large number of users to very quickly, mine data information and potentially also spread misinformation. All you have to do is go to YouTube and watch all the videos out there. The good news maybe is that we will learn to pretty much be very critical of anything we see online in the future, and go back to having more conversations that are face to face to validate that it's truly a human being out there. So that in a nutshell are the 3 different scenarios and areas that I teach, and 3 different views of generative AI. And so on the one side, I'm positive. I cannot count on human nature that AI will be used for good. However, there is a lot of good with guardrails. Okay. And as the technology matures, I think there will be a backlash from humans with some of the directions that AI is heading into right now.
How do you see it as a teacher? Meaning, how do you individually, but how does the school kind of tell you how to implement, how to put it into place so that it's effective, but so that people are also learning about it as well?
Let me speak personally as an instructor, and then I'll address some of the things that the campus is doing. So, for example, in entrepreneurship theory and practice course, we have a combination of articles that we ask students to read. And so now you can query articles, you can get summaries of pretty much everything that's online, YouTube videos, the same thing. And so I think for faculty members, one change is how do we assess our students? A simple multiple choice quiz isn't sufficient anymore, because it's very easy to just have comment on another browser, answer all of the questions, and do pretty well. on that. And so if we want students to spend some time then looking at authentic assignments that have them reflect. And so one example that I use in my entrepreneurship theory and practice is students have journals where you handwrite, not as a punitive measure, more along the lines of you'll read an article or you'll have a conversation or you could, listen to a podcast, just this one or any other podcasts out there, and then do some follow up with one of the speakers on LinkedIn if something resonated with you, and then go down the rabbit hole, maybe pick a book that you want to read or a video, and then write down your one or two key takeaways, and then have a conversation with somebody else in the class. So you're learning about some information, you're sharing knowledge, but the outcome is recorded in a journal that you will turn in at the end of the semester as part of your final project or exam. And so I think switching gears to what usually I'll do is I'd have a quiz or have a paper that you write. And so I no longer ask students to write a paper unless it's towards a very specific goal, a bachelor's essay, for example, because the tools that will help you do them very quickly are readily available. So changing the assessment is one of them. The second thing I try to do as an instructor is flip the class. We use micro credentials from Coursera, DataCamp, or something that will help you get a professional certification. So there's students are incentivized, for example, if you want to get into cybersecurity, need security plus certifications, that will be the first step. And so there's an incentive to do that. And then we bring in guest speakers who are hiring our students to explain why what they're learning is important. So slowing down the learning process is part of that, making it intentional. And you'll hear this a lot, the intentionality around education, not necessarily just for the workplace, but how do you become a lifelong learner? Because companies are now hiring individuals who can adapt and who are lifelong learners. If all you can do is generate the output of ChatGPT, then we're just going to use ChatGPT and not hire you. And so I think that's the plus. What value do you add beyond your knowledge of ChatGPT to an organization? And a lot of it has to do with insights. How do you add value for a customer transaction? How do you reduce costs? How do you de-risk a particular situation? And that's not something you can generally go to ChatGPT and ask at any given time. It comes with experience, it comes with listening, it comes with asking the right questions. So individually, I've changed assessments. We take students. I found when, for example, students have to compete for a statewide pitch competition, the bar is set a lot higher. They'll spend a lot more time. There's external validation. And so that becomes part of the grade, is where we use the tools and the resources, mentors especially, to help our students learn on the spot in order to tell a compelling story using real world metrics. So they have to look at the financials, have a compelling story, have a product that individuals will want to purchase. And so in entrepreneurship, that's easy to do. That's an outcome. If you make it to the $1 million catalyst pitch, for example, that's an A in my class immediately, if you've taken the time to get that far. Now, granted, this is not something we can do across the board, but it's just some ways that faculty are being forced to go back to the drawing board and find ways that make sense to how do we incorporate AI, but still maintain academic integrity, provide value added services to our students in a meaningful way to their long term career goals and learning goals. It's not only about careers, because you'll change careers, Spencer, multiple times. So it's about learning.
Now, do you think that companies and that they're gonna start to put in the like whether it's teachings or kind of like follow-ups for here's how to implement AI within our company so that it's the most effective and so that it helps us become the most productive with whatever task or whatever job you're doing.
Absolutely, especially in firms that have regulation in the environment, any financial firm, any firm that's dealing with patient data. Colleges, for example, we are bound by FERPA regulations that control how we can share information. So as a faculty member, I cannot just take student data and put it into ChatGPT and ask it to analyze or do a grade book. So yes, institutions are doing that in ways that will maintain confidentiality of the data, but also protect intellectual property. If you're not feeding the algorithm with data that's considered either confidential or intellectual property. So there's a lot of training that happens at larger organizations, mid-sized organizations. There still are data breaches. So that part driven primarily by legislation. What happens if there is a breach or if someone shares information? For example, I cannot share any student's grade out on the internet or even via email for that matter. And a lot of training happens within organizations with regards to sensitivity of data.
Well, how do you think that like big companies are going to go about doing it? Meaning, like implementing it in the like bringing on new people and telling them, here's how you use ChatGPT or Claude or Gronk, and here's how we're going to implement it, but here's how it's going to help us become like 60% more effective with whatever task it is.
So I think the first step generally, and this is more of an IT function, is to look at tools that I approved. And so I'm going to just use the College of Charleston, for example. We're primarily a Microsoft shop, and so we have Microsoft Copilot that's enabled for students and for faculty, the free version that keeps the data with our data set of academics. It doesn't really share the data out to Microsoft or OpenAI, but you can still use the tool and benefit from the tool. And so if you're a Microsoft 365 um, Copilot user, for example, you can use Copilot within Microsoft Office, Microsoft Outlook, connect all of the information without it leaving College of Charleston's data domain. So the training will be essentially here are the tools we authorize to use, and large companies are starting to do that with some of the providers, whether and institutions, academic institutions are doing some of those partnerships. USC and Clemson, for example, I think with OpenAI and some other large institutions have partnerships to try and prescribe what tools you can use so that your data is not sent out to
And that
places you shouldn't be.
and that's going to be a little bit of a concern for data privacy so that like foreign country or whoever it is doesn't get your data and use it as a leverage or an advantage, so to speak.
That's one way to mitigate the risk of doing that. If you have one control point, training your employees. Now, that's not to say that there are no other multiple ways in which data can be bridged. It has a lot of it has to do with training, but some of it goes beyond training. But that's the very first step to de-risk, and so it involves really getting your employees trained. And so one way to think about this is the College of Charleston has a 5-year or 10-year plan, a quality enhancement plan for intentional AI. Essentially, what it is how do we build AI literacy in our students, beginning with the freshman year to when you graduate, so that you're prepared to address some of what we just discussed is when you go into the employment workplace, when is it appropriate to use AI? When is it not appropriate to use AI? If you use it, do you understand the risk from the corporate environment? And so how do we train our students to scan the environment, to learn enough about the use case of AI in each different scenario? So this applies to the College of Charleston too, where each faculty member can set the AI policy for the individual course. But beyond that, they may also set the AI policy for individual assignments. As a faculty member myself, I'll say students can use AI on certain assignments, and on certain assignments, I'll give them directives that they cannot use AI. But then it's also upon me to tell them why. If AI is going to do all the work for you, then you probably shouldn't attend college. There's no need to really pay all the extra large sums of money that you are if you're not learning anything in the process. So if you learn the background information. So from a business standpoint, we're trying to figure out what the value proposition is, figure out how to solve the right problem. Then you bring in the automation tools later on to do them more efficiently. Effectiveness is figuring out the right solution to the problem. And sometimes jumping to AI at the very first moment without thinking through can be time wasted. And other times it works. It really depends on the case scenario. It's a great tool for brainstorming, but at the end of the day, if you turn in any assignment, Spencer, that has your name on it, you are responsible for everything. And so we try to educate our students on this idea of being and owning it. And so if you're using AI, then make sure based on your professor's requirements, how do you cite it properly? And then make sure you talk to them ahead of time to see what their policies are so you can avoid an honor board hearing, which could have negative consequences in terms of graduating on time.
Taking a little bit of a pivot for entrepreneurship, how is what you do kind of different, and what do you see people excel at and what do you see people kind of lack when they do it, so to speak?
Entrepreneurship. So my journey into entrepreneurship, started when I was a teenager, and then when I came to the United States, I was fortunate enough to join a startup and then exited out of that a little early into teaching. I tell my students I used to invest in firms and companies. Now I primarily invest in freshmen, and I have a 4-year term in terms of ROI. I think you've had William Hefgott and some others on
Uh,
the podcast. So William's story was one when I met him. I think he was in middle school, and so coming to the College of Charleston, I see each student and I tell them, each one of you is a startup. You'll go in different directions. You'll spend, everyone's unique. And my role as a faculty mentor is to invest in you, not necessarily monetary, but by providing you with connections, mentors on campus who can speed you up to whatever your big, hairy, audacious goal is in the next 4 years to provide value to you at this institution. And so my not so hidden agenda, Spencer, is if I do a good job, then William and other students come back as guest speakers to my class, and then they inspire the next generation. And so it's a circular, eight forward scenarios of mentors. So I like to envision education as an investment, but rather than waiting until when you graduate, can William take this little marketing class, not little, but marketing nugget that he received from his marketing course and then international trade and figure out how to leverage that information sooner rather than later and then create value for himself. And that extends to every single student that's in my classes. How do we personalize? And so the beauty of AI, in my opinion, this is me as an individual instructor, is its ability to personalize learning for each and every student. And so imagine a class, and this again cannot be one of the core classes where you have a set curriculum, but if you walked into a class, Spencer, where you have some learning objectives, and as an instructor, I'd say, Spencer, here's some tools. I'm going to prescribe 50% based on my experience, but I want you to experiment now based on your journey. How can you use AI to help you meet some of these learning objectives in a way that's uniquely you, that will help you amplify your story and maybe connect with more potential individuals to come on your podcast. And so that becomes part of your assignment, because I know you're highly motivated, number one, to do that. Number two, you'll make some genuine networking connections and you'll learn from multiple individuals. But I think to me, the most valuable part then is you sharing that with your classmate. That makes you a subject matter expert. And the next time anyone hears about somebody who would be a great speaker in your podcast, then they'll pass that information on to you. The beauty of AI, in my opinion, is we can use some aspects to personalize your educational journey.
so the question that has been left for you is what's one thing that changed the way you think?
I think it's reading. I grew up in an unplugged world, and reading allowed me reading different books. As a kid, I would read encyclopedias, how it works and how random things work, grandfather clocks, etc. But just reading, taking the time to sit down and think. I don't think young individuals have time to be bored anymore. The moment we're bored, we hop on to a TikTok stream, but that boredom, that sense of just sitting down with yourself and thinking through any problems or challenge. So that mindset is in many ways enabled what I call the entrepreneurial mindset, is sitting down, thinking about something, or even not thinking about it. Take time to be bored and clear your mind. Our minds were not designed to be on 24/7. Allows you to come up with clear solutions to problems out there. And so, this was instilled in me in a very young age. And, some students who go through like Montessori education, where they watch peers who are mentors slightly older than them actually trying to solve problems before they actually try to do it, is another thing that's changed my thinking in many ways. Is we're bombarded with faculty like myself telling students, what to do and how to do things. My personal preference is for them to fail fast, fail early, and learn from the failures of others. So I think that the change in my mindset has been to highlight the failures early and say, other people have failed in entrepreneurship. There are ways to learn from failures. You don't have to make the same mistakes over and over again. So that change in the mindset has helped me out tremendously. I always ask folks, given this scenario, what are the failure points? How do you think this could fail? And then design systems that will ensure success. The same way we hope to ensure success, that our students have a 4-year graduation plan. We look at the failure points and then try and address the root cause of those failure points.
What's the question that you have for the next guest coming on the podcast? You don't know who it is. And the second part of that question is, who are 2 to 3 people that you would recommend for the podcast?
Okay. The question I would have for the next guest is, whatever stage they are, it's what's the big, hairy, audacious goal at any given point. For me, that's mentoring right now. It's inspiring more people to mentor, but find out what the person's big, hairy, audacious goal is. And the second one was what again?
Who are 2 to 3 people that would be good to have on the podcast that you would recommend?
I'd recommend reaching out to first year students. I don't know if that's in is doing a podcast for first year students. I've always found it amazing. You do a podcast interview in a freshman year maybe, and then come back 4 years later. I'm inspired by our first year students, and the reason I recommended first year students for AI specifically is to see what freshmen and how they're using AI. There's been some really inspiring examples where I've come across freshmen using AIs in really novel and unique ways, which I think from an entrepreneurial standpoint is the basis for companies down the line. So again, my recommendation would be first year students and how they're using AI.
Do you have any closing remarks or anything that's pondering before I wrap this up?
Closing remarks is be yourself. I encourage everyone who's listening to this podcast to be a lifelong learner, to learn something new each day from people around there. Just be open and be curious.
All right, this was episode number 21 of the Young Entrepreneurs Podcast, and I want to say thank you to Professor Afonso for taking time, I'm sure, out of his busy day when he didn't, or I'm sure he could have done other things, but he was like, you know what, I'll take 30 to 40 minutes out of my day to come on. So I really appreciate it. Uh, if you are listening on Apple, Amazon, or YouTube, hit the subscribe button and the notification button. And don't forget to leave a comment as it helps. I'm sure not more than you know. But until next time, peace.